If we had substances that were body-wide toxins and we released them into the public, having tested them on mice and not discovering that they were dangerous, that you would see relatively young people die from heart conditions, which is where we would detect that there's a problem before we would detect it anywhere else.
Joe Rogan shocked everyone by saying that a dangerous substance was secretly spread across the U.S. This made people ask if the scientists did something wrong that could harm public health by testing this substance on rodents without them knowing. What if this hidden experiment is just the start of something bigger? Before we get into the details, it looks like what we found might just be the start of a bigger, scarier problem that could surprise the world. Genetically modified mice unleashed. Joe suggested that this secret substance had been tested on rodents and showed no harm, but he wondered if it could still lead to health issues, especially in young people. He thought we might see more heart problems in younger people, which would be a clear warning sign. This raised concerns about whether scientists were being honest with the public and if their lack of transparency could be putting people at risk. But what if these substances are more dangerous than anyone realized, especially to our younger population? Stay tuned as we dig deeper into what the scientists might not be telling us. Over the years, science has made huge progress, especially in healthcare. Scientists are often praised for finding solutions to important health problems. But sometimes when hidden agendas come to light, it raises big questions about the ethics of what they're doing. For those who know about these secret projects, the concerns are only growing. Thanks to a whistleblower and conversations on the Joe Rogan podcast, more details have started to come out about these secretive activities. This has led to a big debate. Are these scientific efforts actually doing more harm than good? Now that the truth is starting to come to the surface, people are wondering if it's already too late to fix these serious mistakes. And next year, 2023, might reveal even more about the ethical challenges the scientific community is facing as the results of these hidden experiments become clearer. But here's the real question. If the warnings are true, can we really fix the damage already done? When secret data came out, it caused a lot of concern. It included emails, documents, and reports from a well-known research center in Massachusetts. These documents revealed that scientists were planning to release a large number of genetically engineered mice into the community without telling anyone. It sounded like something out of a scary movie where people wake up to find their town full of mice. Even though the plan might not have been meant to cause fear, the documents explained that these mice would be released in different areas of the state. The scientists thought they had a good reason for keeping it secret. According to the leaked information, their main goal was to see how these lab-grown mice would adjust to the wild. They hoped to learn what impact these genetically modified mice would have on local wildlife and whether they would offer any benefits. It turns out that these mice had been specially altered to survive better than regular wild mice. They were designed to be stronger and more resistant to diseases. The reason behind this big experiment was to help tackle a serious health problem, Lyme disease. This illness has affected Massachusetts since the early 1990s, and the scientists thought these mice might be able to help fight it. But here's the thing. Critics found out that the original plan was to release the mice on a deserted island first. This was so the scientists could observe how the mice behaved and what effects they had, all in a controlled space where no humans lived. This step was just one part of a larger project to use these disease-resistant mice to combat Lyme disease, which could bring real health benefits to areas dealing with the disease. The idea of releasing these mice without anyone knowing has sparked serious questions about what could go wrong. The plan was to release genetically modified mice in Nantucket, a location severely affected by Lyme disease, to see if they could curb the outbreak. These mice, engineered to be immune to Lyme disease, were meant to break the transmission cycle from mice to ticks to humans. The concept, proposed by an MIT professor and supported by the Nantucket Board of Health, received backing from about 20 local residents despite concerns. Critics argued that this small group's approval might not represent the entire community's stance and worried about the undisclosed risks of introducing these altered mice into the wild. This experimental plan was certainly controversial, but it was fueled by the urgent need to do something about the Lyme disease crisis that had been troubling the island for years. Between 1992 and 2001, government records showed that Nantucket had the highest rates of Lyme disease in the country, and it was still a big issue in 2006. The community was so desperate for help that even an extreme solution like this seemed like a good idea to some. Nantucket's battle against Lyme disease. For decades, Lyme disease has been a huge problem for the people living in Nantucket. A surgeon at Nantucket Hospital pointed out that the number of cases has been underreported since the 1980s. Even though about 300 cases are recorded every year, the real number is likely higher, especially considering the small population of the area. This explains why those 20 residents were so eager to accept the solution offered by the professor and the Board of Health. They were hoping it could finally stop the spread of the disease. The plan focused on the white-footed mice, which play a big role in spreading Lyme disease. These mice are the main host for ticks, which pass the disease from the mice to other animals and people. The solution was to make these mice genetically resistant to the disease. By stopping the mice from giving the disease to ticks, scientists believed they could greatly reduce the number of Lyme disease cases. Scientists aimed to identify and enhance genes that made mice resistant to Lyme disease, planning to distribute these traits throughout the mouse population. They intended to release about 100,000 genetically modified mice in batches over a year to gradually integrate them into the environment and curb the disease's spread. While this innovative approach promised a lasting solution to a long-standing community issue, concerns arose about the environmental risks and the safety of releasing so many altered animals. If the experiment in Nantucket worked as planned, the goal was to expand the release of genetically modified mice to more areas in the Northeast. To the scientists, this wasn't just an exciting new discovery in medical research. It could also be a big help to farming. They saw this carefully controlled release of mice as a huge step forward. But when people found out about the secretive nature of the project, their reaction wasn't positive. Many started questioning why the project had been kept so quiet if it was really supposed to help the community. It raised the big question: if this idea was so beneficial, why wasn't it shared openly from the start? People were also worried about the unknown risks versus the potential rewards. This type of genetic change had never been tried on such a large scale before, so the outcomes could be wildly different than expected, either really good or really bad. Despite these worries, the scientists pushed ahead. They used an advanced gene editing tool called CRISPR, which allowed them to change the genes of a large group of mice. This was the first time that genetically modified mice, created using CRISPR, were going to be released into a real-world setting. Some people, including a guest on the Joe Rogan podcast, suggested that the scientists might have realized things weren't going perfectly partway through the project. Instead of stopping, they reportedly chose to downplay the risks and kept moving forward, even though they may have seen warning signs. It seemed like they didn't fully consider how badly things could go wrong and ignored critical issues that might arise from their experiment. Claiming the situation was under control seemed inadequate for an issue that could significantly impact the environment and public health. This dismissive response heightened concerns about the potential dangers of such a significant scientific intervention. Joe Rogan's podcast highlighted serious doubts about the intentions and errors of the scientists involved in the genetically modified mice project. Leaked documents revealed that it might take more than a year to see any impact on Lyme disease or tick populations, emphasizing the uncertainty and risks of the project, given the massive release of modified mice. People became even more doubtful when they realized they might have to deal with a bigger mouse population for more than a year without any guarantee that it would lower Lyme disease rates. Critics wondered why the scientists were flooding the environment with these mice instead of focusing on other treatments that might work faster and better. When the public found out about the plan by accident, the scientists tried to calm everyone down by saying that the first test would happen in uninhabited areas before releasing the mice on the islands or in other states. But this promise didn't really help ease concerns about what could happen to the environment and public health if these genetically modified mice were let loose. It didn't help that some biologists were worried about the health risks these modified mice might bring. They pointed out that these lab-engineered mice might not be good at showing how the genetic changes would work in the wild. The mice could behave in unexpected ways once they were out in nature, which might lead to problems nobody saw coming. The project, while creative, seemed to be surrounded by secrecy and confusion. The way the scientists handled it made it seem like they cared more about pushing forward than being open about what they were doing, which left the public feeling uncertain and anxious. The discussion on Joe Rogan's podcast highlighted the tricky ethical, environmental, and health issues that come with genetic experiments like this one. The genetically modified mice designed to fight Lyme disease could end up taking over the local mouse population, throwing off the natural balance of the ecosystem. These new mice, with their enhanced traits, might outcompete the native mice, changing how things work in the environment. Genetic gamble. This paints a pretty worrying picture of what could happen when scientists manipulate genetics without fully considering the effects on nature. While these mice might help reduce Lyme disease, there's a real concern that they could spread other, possibly more dangerous diseases. With their stronger immune systems and faster breeding, these new mice could cause diseases to spread quickly among animals and even people. The impact of this kind of biological experiment could be huge. If the number of genetically modified mice grows too fast, they might consume more natural resources than the ecosystem can handle. This could hurt other animals, plants, and even predators, disrupting the food chain and habitats in ways we can't fully predict. On top of that, the Joe Rogan podcast raised questions about whether scientists were working behind the scenes with journalists to hide the full truth about their experiments. This possible manipulation of information has only made the public trust them less. It seems like journalists who at first were interested in the story began to lose enthusiasm when they dug deeper, suggesting that the public might not be getting the whole picture from the scientists. As the conversation continues, it's becoming clear that the scientists might not have as much control over the situation as they thought. The risk of an ecological disaster feels very real, raising important questions about the ethics and practicality of using genetic modification as a way to fight disease. The public, already nervous about how secretive the project has been, now has to wonder if the dangers of interfering with nature might outweigh the potential benefits. When the genetically modified mice are released into the wild, things could get unpredictable. In the controlled environment of a lab, scientists can track their behavior, but once in nature, these mice might act in ways no one expected. This could undo all the benefits the scientists saw in their carefully planned experiments. The spread of these genetically engineered mice into the ecosystem could bring big risks. Since these mice have enhanced abilities, like being better hunters, they might end up overhunting and quickly wiping out the animals they feed on. This could cause a ripple effect throughout the ecosystem because every species plays a role in keeping the balance. If the prey species disappear, the modified mice might start moving into human areas looking for food, which could increase the chances of diseases spreading between animals and people. Another concern is how these mice will adapt once they are out in the wild. While they all came from the same lab in Bar Harbor, Maine, the Jackson Laboratory, and were treated the same way, this doesn't mean they will behave the same once they face the challenges of the natural world. Things like different weather conditions, interactions with other animals, and random genetic changes could cause them to act in ways that weren't predicted in the lab. The episode on Joe Rogan's podcast also pointed out how complicated and unpredictable it can be to release genetically modified animals into nature. Just because the mice were resistant to diseases in the lab doesn't mean they will be in the wild. In the natural world, parasites and other disease-causing organisms can evolve and change, which could lead to outcomes no one can foresee. This shows why more real-world testing and risk studies are needed before projects like this are carried out on a big scale. The whole situation raises tough questions about how genetic engineering might affect the environment and human health in the long run. It's clear that while these technologies have a lot of potential, they also need to be handled carefully, with proper regulation and planning. The case of these genetically modified mice in Nantucket serves as a reminder that when human innovation moves faster than careful thinking, the unintended consequences can be huge. One of the biggest concerns with releasing genetically modified mice into the wild is that they could breed with the native mice. This could create hybrid offspring that carry a mix of traits from both the modified and wild mice. These hybrids might be even stronger or better at surviving, which could give them an advantage over the native mouse population. This kind of genetic contamination could change the balance of the ecosystem in ways that can't be undone. Another worry is that the modified mice, which are designed to be resistant to certain diseases, could put evolutionary pressure on the diseases themselves. In other words, if the pathogens can't infect the modified mice, they might evolve to become stronger and more dangerous, possibly even shifting to other animals or humans. This process, known as selective pressure, means the very changes meant to protect the mice could lead to new, more powerful diseases that are harder to fight or control. The risk of these stronger disease strains spreading among both modified and wild mice is especially troubling. If these new diseases develop, they could cause large outbreaks that harm not just wildlife, but people as well. The possibility of accidentally creating a new, untreatable disease is a serious concern, adding more complications to what started as a well-meaning project. Biologists are also nervous about what could happen to the environment as a whole. Releasing genetically modified organisms like these mice could affect more than just the mouse population. Other animals in the ecosystem might also be impacted in ways we don't yet understand, leading to ripple effects that could disrupt the entire balance of nature. Releasing genetically modified mice poses several risks, including gene mixing with native species, potential new disease outbreaks, and unpredictable environmental impacts. These risks underscore the need for thorough studies and strict regulations before proceeding with such significant biological experiments. This caution is necessary to ensure we don't harm nature more than we help it. Additionally, concerns about the ecosystem and ethical issues are heightened by the project's secrecy, as discussed on Joe Rogan's podcast, leading to decreased public trust. One big worry is how these modified mice could change the natural balance. If they start to breed with wild mice, we could see hybrid species with unpredictable behavior. These hybrids might throw off food chains and disrupt how the ecosystem works. Worse, there's a chance that new diseases could pop up, not just affecting wildlife, but potentially spreading to humans. So what started as an effort to fight Lyme disease might end up causing even bigger problems. There's also the problem of how secretive this whole project has been. Normally, scientific experiments, especially ones that involve changing an animal's genes and releasing them into nature, are done with lots of oversight and public involvement. This is important not just to keep people informed, but also to make sure the environment is protected. By moving forward without getting input from the broader public or going through all the necessary checks, the scientists might have crossed an ethical line. This isn't just about public safety, it also damages the trust people have in science. In research, protecting the public and the environment should always come first. And that means being transparent and careful when trying out new technologies. The fact that this project has been kept under wraps, with the potential to change the environment in ways we can't reverse, shows why science needs to be more accountable. While genetic engineering can help solve big problems, it must be done safely, with clear communication and public involvement, to avoid creating even bigger risks for both humans and nature. What other dangers might we be overlooking in this high-stakes genetic gamble? If you're intrigued by these pressing questions, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned as we explore the dark side of scientific experimentation.